How's it going, everybody? It's the CDH Warrior coming at you with an episode of the Shirtless Chef. So, there we go. There's a better angle for this camera. Today, we're going to be working on making a recipe called Yaki Udon. This is the recipe of Yaki Udon. So, for the most part, I'm going to show you start to finish with very little editing. Sorry, I'm just trying to adjust the camera myself as I'm going through. So, the way this recipe is supposed to work is it's kind of it's not a high food prep. You're not going to be prepping a lot. But this is basically making udon noodles like yakisoba stir-fried, which means we can add whatever vegetables or whatever vegetable scraps we have. I have half an onion and broccoli, cauliflower, and carrots that I'm going to add to this. But for the rest of it, I've got stir-fry udon noodles, which I bought from my local grocery store. Soy sauce. Mirin. Hang on one second. Sorry about that. Had to step out and find my mushrooms. I don't have the green onions, scallions. Give me 1 second. Let me make sure of that. Yeah, I just confirmed I do not have green onions. So, some of the more specific things. I've got the mixed vegetables in place, the carrots and the extras. I don't have any specific meat. Give me 1 second. Let me rephrase that. I have some imitation crab that I'll use. Normally this would be done with pork belly, but in this case I don't necessarily have pork belly, so we're going to go with this instead. The other things we need are vegetable oil, salt, and black pepper. And this is going to come together relatively quick. This will be about 15 minutes or so. I'm going to try not to block out what I'm doing, or at least show you all what I'm doing. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to shuffle the camera a little bit so you all can see this. I'm going to lay my cutting board over here. And I'm going to cut an onion. Now I have half an onion that I'm going to add to this. It's just what I happen to have, so we're going to use it. Since this is kind of a pretty do-it-yourself kind of a recipe, and yes, I'm searching for things in my kitchen. We're going to cut an onion. So instead of dicing the onion, we're just going to thinly slice it. I did borrow this recipe off of just one cookbook, so if you want to go find the recipe just to follow along, it's going to be right there under Yaki Udon. Now, I need to go ahead and admit something. I have never made this recipe. So, if I botch it completely, that's why. Try and flip this over. So I have not started heating my pan up yet. I just wanted to get everything kind of prepped first. This is probably my first video where I'm actually flat out cooking rather than trying to do a boxed meal to try and taste test. This is full-on cooking. This is not a recipe I have done before, so there's going to be something I'm going to mess up. But we mess up, so be it. It's not like we're going to offend too much of anyone. We're going to use about half this package of imitation crab. But we're going to try and take this vegetable medley and turn it into something. We're going to put our onion back in this little plastic container. And yes, there is a thunderstorm right now. I don't necessarily know if I'm going to do much to my carrots and cauliflower and broccoli. This is just a random vegetable medley we had laying around at the house. So that's what I'm going to try and use. And it's actually perfect that I'm doing this because it's slowly dying. I'm going to try my best to actually cut this. But the knife's here, so really all I need to do is just break it up. I don't really need to worry about slicing or anything. Just break it up so it's not in huge chunks. And this is a recipe you can kind of take some liberties with, dependent on where you live, what you eat, what you have at your grocery store or your local market. So, part of the reason why I cook without a shirt is so you all can see the scars that I have. But I want to explain why I have the scars. I am a congenital diaphragmatic hernia survivor. And a lot of us end up having food allergies of some kind or another, either from surgeries or we were just flat out born with them. I have a dairy and lactose allergy that I have a hard time with. So I have to watch what has dairy in it, although that does not keep me from eating cheese at random. Although I have slowly found cheeses that I can eat. The other day, I found some cheese that our Horsehead supplier actually makes from work, so I ended up getting that. So we've got that, our vegetable medley, our onions, our mushrooms. Instead of adding green onions, I'm just going to omit it because I just don't happen to have it right now. We're going to take some vegetable oil. And put it in a pan. We're going to just kind of slowly run through this quick so you can actually see in real time how all this works. Like I said, this is not a true to form traditional creation. I'm taking my own liberties with it. But should be interesting nonetheless. I am going to open my mushrooms and go ahead and get those where I can. Go ahead and use them. It's about 6 o'clock here. I don't know what time it is where you are when you're watching this. But it's one. Yes, I'm following recipe. And I'm taking some minor liberties with it, but in general, this is going to remain true to form. So for the most part, we're going to start out, we're going to add our oil. I believe this is vegetable oil. About a tablespoon is what we'll use. And none of these are perfect. We're not looking for perfection here. We're just looking to make it work. Grab a spoon. You know what? Instead, I'll grab a spatula. May actually work a little better. No, I will use the spoon. Because I think that will make it a little easier in the end. And I'm just trying to coat my wok with oil. Because once I get started on this, it's going to go pretty quick. Now I've got it on medium heat, so about 5 if you're using a cooktop. It's just getting there. It's not high yet. -1. I started beginning to learn how to cook, especially on things like this. because I was realizing that figuring out a diet that works, especially with us with CDH, we have a hard time gaining weight. I mean, I'm only around 125 to 130 pounds, so I'm rather small for my size. It's when some of us have food allergies that cause us to not be able to gain weight. Some of us have dietary issues from our surgeries and whatnot. Some of us have a hard time with different textures of food, so it gets hard for us to eat specific things. I still, to this day, cannot stand Jell-O. I know that sounds really weird, but that's just me. But it's one, looks like we're getting pretty close on this. The only thing that I don't have, you'll give me a second, I'll retrieve it. I've actually got a lid that'll fit this, hilariously enough. This is not made for this, but it works. So, normally with this recipe, you put pork in first, but I'm not using pork, I'm using imitation crab. And it really doesn't need to cook. So, we're going to just go ahead and add our vegetables in. So, here's the onion. And we're going to stir fry this until it gets tender. And you want to keep the onions moving to an extent because you do not want them to burn. So one of the things that I don't have is soup base. But instead of using a soup base, that spoon in the onion container, we're going to use soy sauce. We're not going to add that yet. I just need to get all that set out together. Looks like our onion's starting to get there. Our onion is starting to get translucent, so Now everything's going to move relatively quick. And we're still only 20 minutes into this, so it's a relatively quick item. I'm going to add a pinch of salt, a little bit of pepper. Stir that together. Oh, escapee. Hey, this is home cooking. So be it. Now we're going to take and add our mushrooms. Mushrooms won't take that long, maybe a few minutes to stir fry. And this is going to look like a lot, but you need to remember that this is going to kind of cook down. In the couple of minutes we're going to cook it. So, yes, it may seem like a lot. But if you don't add a lot at the beginning, you're not going to have much at the end. Now, I do not have the dashi powder or the sake, but I have mirin, which is Japanese sweet rice wine, and some soy sauce. And that will be our base for the soup, or base for our sauce. Now we're going to add our imitation crab. Kids don't do that at home. But here's our imitation crab. We're going to put maybe half a cup in there, because we're going to have it with a whole bunch of extra stuff. So it's not like we're skimping on a lot of stuff. Yeah, my other phone apparently just decided to come on. In case you all are wondering what that noise in the background was. We're just going to stir that. So we're slowly building our layers. We're going to season this layer. And now we're going to add our onions, our carrots, and broccoli and cauliflower. We're just adding that straight in. We're not going to worry too much about cutting it because it's going to stir fry in. Now I'm going to put our lid back over just so that can steam. So while we're working on that, while that's working, we're going to try and get here and get our noodles prepped. So I've got udon stir-fry noodles. These are relatively traditional for this recipe. And we're just going to use one touch of the udon because there's going to be so much else. And one of these little packets is just 2 servings. So it's not like we're going hungry, per se. We're going to cut the heat down. Stir this for a minute. Now we've added the mushrooms and everything. Now as for our seasoning, we're going to use this little container that I had from the onion, and we're going to mix it in this. I don't have dashi powder, so we're just going to skip that step with this recipe. You can omit it. This is our 2 tablespoons of soy sauce. This is actually going to be a good bit. I just realized this recipe has a teaspoon of mirin and not a tablespoon. So I'm going to grab another measuring spoon. Add my teaspoon of mirin. And mirin is a sweet cooking wine. Where sake has more of a salty flavor, this has a sweet flavor. And I'm just going to stir it with the tablespoon measure. everything's starting to come together nicely, so that's going to be pretty good. Let me stir this for a second. Now I'm going to put my noodles in. Not package and all, but just the noodles. And I'm going to kind of push them to the bottom. Grab the spoon. Kind of shuffle this around. Then I'm going to add just a slight bit of water. Just to let this steam. It's going to be really good soup base. Now I'm going to slowly put things back away. And this is going to be as close to live as I can get it. I'm going to let it steam for a minute or two and then we'll add our finishing touches. So one of the reasons why I cook a lot of Japanese style food is because I find that a lot of it tends to avoid things like dairy and a lot of other different allergens. Now, granted, you still have soy allergens for the soy sauce and things like that. But for the most part, it's relatively allergen friendly. They also tend to rely a whole lot more on fresh vegetables rather than in the United States where we use a whole bunch of processed meat. Do they have some processed meat? Occasionally. And some of it is primarily from where they've adopted a lot of Western cultures, a lot of Western food. We're going to turn that down to a simmer and let it just kind of begin to steam. I don't have a glass lid that'll fit this. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about lifting the lid. So, where was I? Oh, discussing why I cook what I do. And why I cook some of these things for on camera for videos, for how-to videos, is it's not a very common thing for somebody to go through and look if they have food allergies. It's not easy to find recipes. I know there are some people that are going to comment and state, well, it's actually fairly easy to find recipes. Not really. A lot of times you have to find recipes and then omit certain ingredients or add certain ingredients or risk ending up in trouble getting sick. So I try and cook as simply as I can. Let's come and check on our noodles. I don't know if you can see. Our noodles are starting to get there. Our vegetables are pretty much steamed. Give it another 2 minutes or so just to completely steam the noodles. May actually stir through it before I put the lid back on. Oh yeah, the noodles are starting to break apart, so this is going to be a great recipe. Noodles are almost there. Let me taste some of this to see how it... That actually cooked pretty well. Try one of these. Seasoning's good. Now let me add our sauce that we made earlier. This was the soy sauce and mirin that we made earlier. We're just going to pour this in here and just stir it one last time to combine. And I used udon noodles specifically because they would hold up to cooking like this. The recipe called for udon, but the reason why is because with something like this, you want a noodle like that that's going to hold up. For instance, I could not have done this with just ramen noodles. That would not have worked. I could have done this with rice noodles, but I'm not sure. That would have probably also taken me a little bit longer to steam. I'm going to try one of these noodles here. Oh yeah, that's soaked up a lot of our sauce. So that's going to be really good. Last thing we're going to do is That doesn't need any more seasoning, so we're good. Now we're just going to take and plate, and I'm going to show you how that's done. Now I am going to get tongs for plating, because it's not going to work very well if I plate it just with the spoon. Give me 1 second to get a plate. I'm going to grab my tongs. We've got some rubber tongs that we're going to use. Oh, look at that. That with our mushrooms and onions. Our onion pretty much cooked out of it. So it doesn't look like we kept much of it. Oh, it's escaping. So this is our plating. And I'm going to do the second plate. I'm going to hold this one over here. I'm going to get our spoon. Put a little bit of that sauce on here. Get rid of this pot lid because it's no longer needed. It served its purpose. Our sauce pretty much cooked down and out of it. So there's really not a whole lot of sauce with it. But this turned out really good. Let me grab a fork. And now for the taste. It's sweet, it's savory. The soy sauce really goes well. That sauce is really good. For something that I was kind of flying by the seat of my pants to do it, this tastes really good. So for the CDH Warrior and the Shirtless Chef, this was my take on Yaki Udon. Have a great day.